behaviour. Now, I think that's really important in the context of these massive investments we're making. And I'll get to the reasons behind this in a few minutes with some examples. And I might draw on some input from some of our esteemed friends from NICTA and Australian Centre for Broadband Innovations, who are, whilst we have a small audience, we have an unbelievably experienced audience, and that we do have a number of world-leading specialists in the room today. Briefly, we've been advocating for some time now, the end of the MCU world is nigh. By that, what I mean is that video conferencing in the past, a lot of the technology has been based on centralised mainframe-style components, multi-point control units. And that's the way the world has been since the 50s and 60s when this technology was created, and it's evolved very, very slowly. And I'll give you some examples as to why the evolution of the technology is creating some real issues for us in the context of the NBN rollout. What we are seeing with this transformation is dramatic reductions in cost. I use the Skype example as a great example because we all have experienced very inexpensive, high-quality video conferencing or web conferencing in Skype and related products, but then many of us have also experienced the very expensive telepresence experience that is still offered to these days. We are seeing a 10 times reduction in price, and it's really hit us only over in the last 2 years. In the context of what's happening with the NBN rollouts, we're doing a lot of work with the Digital Local Government Program funded by the Department of Broadband Communications, where councils are framing scenarios and they're building business cases which are tantalising, and they're real and they make really good sense. And every council, and this is the beauty of the engagement model, every council is coming up with their own story. So we're seeing a lot of really creative work. We're seeing Kiama Council engaging, looking at multi-party connections to aged community members. We're seeing Armidale Council very much focused on shortening the cycle of development application processing. We're seeing Auburn Council being a very multicultural environment, tackling that whole issue of access to government services. We're seeing some of the Tasmanian councils similarly being very innovative in terms of export of their product and how they touch the end customer. It's really important, in our belief, is that we don't have a product-driven debate. There is a fundamental architectural consideration in terms of the way that service providers are deploying technology to satisfy the appetite that exists in the market for high-definition multi-party conferencing. I'll give you a quick example of that, is that we host every fortnight a web conferencing event for a medical community which spans Australia and New Zealand. There are typically 75 people in the meeting room. Virtual meeting room, they're all talking using a combination of web cameras and fixed boardroom systems. And we are already seeing this demand. I want to extend, and for the mathematicians in the room, is to project some scenarios in terms of what community uptake issues are likely to come as a consequence of there being hundreds of people in your organisation using this technology simultaneously. We're using this analogy of obviously the rail lines because it does seem to resonate with a particular demographic of decision makers. In that these are massive investments, and we're seeing some real issues in terms of some sensible architectural discussion not being had. Some really big issues for regional Australia. I grew up, as I say, in Crookville. My folks, believe it or not, still operating on a Windows 97 platform and a satellite link, and unless something's happened recently, I don't think Crookville has actually got digital TV yet. So we're all very excited in the community about what is to come. However, the realist in me suggests that we need to cater for everybody gradually. We can't wait for a big bang because that's not the way these things happen. I've identified some of the quick wins. I think some of the government agencies in the room certainly are very much focused on how they can deliver these things quickly. And that's really all background context. I want to give two examples, and I'm going to provide some commercial information here, which is the way these discussions have to be had at the moment. because there has been such a paradigm shift and such an inflection and it relates to the cost argument, is that there are many organisations that have built their business case around multi-million-dollar investments. And let's talk about one of them. So Royal Flying Doctor Service, which is a fabulous organisation and a great icon and internationally regarded as a real point of reference for remote and emergency medical service delivery. 3 years ago, when we had a discussion with them, we were talking to them about servicing their requirement for innovative video conferencing technology to support their telehealth service delivery. At the time, they were already one of the world leading practitioners when it comes to telehealth, but it was largely telephony based. So as an organisation that has a track record to adopt technology that makes a lot of sense, it was very easy to progress a discussion about the benefits of this. Now, what you may not be aware of is that the Royal Flying Doctor Services are made up of a number of sections that are semi-autonomous. And so I've just simply used the example here of there being 4 separate sections. There are more. 2 or 3 years ago, to provision sort of capacity for a service that this agency might need, for those technical amongst us, you know, a 40-port capable or a 24 capable infrastructure. That's the sort of scenario that you'd be looking at. We would have had a discussion with them, would have gone very quickly to a point where they realised they needed redundancy, and we would have quite easily built a business justification to extract $2 million worth of infrastructure. That's before they'd purchased a single endpoint, as in video conference device, and before they'd actually licensed a single user. Many of you in the room who've been through video conference procurement cycles in the past, there may be some parts of this discussion that resonate. We don't want to hide from this because the solutions that we can offer these days leverage all of that prior investment, and that's important. We had an interesting discussion involving, I think it was the AFP Immigration and Customs about a year and a half ago, where they all realised that they'd all gone out and purchased the sort of infrastructure that we're using here in the example, and they all were having a very logical discussion about federating those devices. I just want to go back. These are the same devices and the same infrastructure as being offered in the market today. The reality is, with the mainframe style architecture and the centralised nature of the way this technology works, is that federation of these devices creates enormous issue, creates latency. And the sort of latency that we've grown accustomed to dealing with in earlier decades when you're on a long-distance phone call to Papua New Guinea or other parts of the world is 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds with satellite links. It just doesn't work, particularly for high-definition video conferencing that you might be using for telehealth. So we had a fundamental problem with that sort of architecture anyway. It didn't really work. Here's where it gets a little bit awkward. Is putting a 100 meg or a gigabit link between these two devices doesn't make any difference. Now, for the Cisco and other architects in the room, I'm happy to have a discussion about how it's managed. But fundamentally, in the context of video conference land, it's a little bit like having 2 tin cans at the end of a high capacity link. It's a fundamental problem. It's an architectural issue. In the discussion that took place in Canberra, if I can get back to it, I think there was an engineer in the room. He said, "Oh, that's rubbish. We're just going to put everything in a big central cluster." I'll let you conclude yourselves who benefits the most out of that sort of infrastructure. Ridiculous reliance on regional connections of variable quality, which the NBN and other networks will certainly improve that issue. But the fundamental reality is the transmission time between those MCUs doesn't go away. So the centralisation and clustering of that infrastructure doesn't solve that latency issue. Okay, so the solution that we've been increasingly focusing on, which is, again, leveraging some innovation that's come out of the video conferencing signalling and communication standards, is this notion of using distributed video routing infrastructure. So getting back to my example, the Royal Flying Doctors, whereas they may have spent $2 million purely on the core infrastructure to provision what they wanted, which fundamentally wouldn't have worked because of the latency across those MCUs. We're now deploying very expensive video routing infrastructure, which by its very nature, because of its IP base, is that we're automatically building redundancy in. Personally, this was actually, whilst making a small commission on $2 million worth of sales would have been nice, it's actually really satisfying to be able to deliver this sort of technical outcome that leverages the capacity of the NBN, but it also, put $1.5 million of copper back into the Royal Flying Doctor Service so they could spend that on aviation fuel and new aircraft if they need it. The other really important thing, and I think this is really exciting, is this ability to localise traffic within different parts of the network. Now, as an entrepreneur, I'm not going to miss the opportunity today to ask for help. Is that as a small business, David and Goliath and everything aside, is that we do need the help of organisations who can see this vision. Anatel is a great example of some really entrepreneurial stuff going on, but by the same token, the federal agencies responsible for the direction setting and evaluating the technical merit of the investments that government and others are making. I think it's time that we all got together and actually sat down and addressed some of these issues. Is that we can supercharge the NBN by simply localising traffic in different parts of the segments. What that means in practice is that I would very much like to have a discussion with the NBN about using the points of intersect and the aggregation points to actually remove all of that unnecessary redundant traffic that will traverse the nation and elsewhere, to actually provide higher levels of performance. So essentially going back to our story, is all of the traffic between the Eastern Operations Division of the Royal Flying Doctor Services stays local. So that's got some real relevance in the context of the next case study. I hope I'm making sense. For those of you, if I've lost you in the process, feel free to come and have a chat with me at the stand. What this means in the context of regional telehealth is quite significant. Broken Hill, when we deployed video conferencing infrastructure, 100-port capable device. In other words, the ability to host 100 concurrent connections within the Broken Hill Flying Doctor Service office, and I think there's about 15 staff. Didn't make a lot of sense. So we just said to them, look, would you mind putting it in the public domain? And their comment was fantastic. That means Western Area Health Service can use it, and the Golf Club can use it, and the local business community can use it. And we said, absolutely. That's the direction. So we're seeing a combination of public as well as private infrastructure. So we've got a hybrid model evolving, and it's very exciting. It's distributed computing. Now, the second example I want to give you is a discussion we had with a South Australian Department of Education site, going along the lines of they wanted to replicate the investment that New South Wales government had made in schools and video conferencing service provision. It was a very simple one, and there's only one slide here, so I'll step you through it. Their scenario was a simple one. They had 3,000 people on this particular regional campus, and we had a discussion with them. We said, what are they doing? Where are you going? And I said, well, look, it's a real issue. It's exciting, actually. The NBN's coming along.